Have you ever wondered why your prayers seem to go unanswered, even when you beg, even when you believe? Maybe it's because you've been waiting for a voice in the sky when the real voice of God has always been whispering inside you. Neville Goddard once said, "Imagination is the voice of God, not a metaphor, a fact. The thoughts you keep dismissing as just imagination are actually divine instructions for creation. Every image that moves your heart is heaven trying to speak through you." The truth is shocking. You've never needed a sign, a prophet, or a miracle. You only needed to listen differently, because the same power that spoke the universe into existence is speaking right now, through your imagination, through feeling, through that quiet certainty that says, "It's already done." This video isn't about techniques, it's about remembrance, remembering that you are the channel through which the divine creates. And once you realize that, prayer stops being word and becomes awareness itself. Most people spend their lives waiting for a voice from the heavens, a sign in the clouds, or a miracle that shouts, "This is God." But the divine rarely announces itself in noise. It whispers, and that whisper comes as an image in your mind, subtle, familiar, almost ordinary. What we call imagination is, in truth, the quiet language of the infinite. Neville Goddard often said that imagination is the voice of God within you. He wasn't being poetic, he was being literal. Every inspired picture, every flash of possibility that feels alive is not just you daydreaming. It's God speaking creation into being, one image at a time. The sacred doesn't need thunder when it already has your consciousness. Think about it. How many of your best ideas arrived when you were relaxed, not even trying? Those moments when a solution, a vision, or a feeling suddenly appeared out of nowhere. That's the same divine imagination Neville Goddard spoke about. The quiet nudge of eternity using your inner screen as its canvas. It's never loud, but it's always precise. We were taught to pray by asking, to wait for signs, to look outside for confirmation. But what if the real sign has always been the image that won't leave your heart? The picture you see every night before sleep, the life you feel calling you. That's not fantasy. That's the divine revealing its blueprint for you through imagination. You see, God within Neville wasn't some distant deity dictating fate. It was awareness itself, the consciousness that shapes form. When you receive an image that stirs your soul, you're hearing the same creative voice that said, "Let there be light." The difference is, now it speaks in symbols, feelings, and subtle knowing, not thunder. And here's the beauty of it. You've already heard this voice thousands of times. Maybe when you imagined a better job and later found yourself in one, or when you saw yourself healed before the doctor did. You called it intuition, coincidence, luck. But it was divine imagination, guiding you toward what you had already accepted inwardly. That's why Neville taught the feeling it real method, because imagination isn't passive. It's the most sacred act of communion with God. When you feel your desire is already done, you're no longer asking, you're agreeing with creation itself. That feeling is the divine saying, "Yes, this is true now." But most people ignore it. They call it just a thought or wishful thinking. And by doing so, they silence the very conversation they've been begging to have. If they only knew that the still, vivid images in their mind were the same voice the prophets once heard, just translated through modern language, emotion, vision, and trust. The secret is to listen differently, not with your ears, but with your attention. To pause when an image moves you, to linger in its feeling until it breathes. This is how the law of assumption manifestation begins, not by asking for signs, but by recognizing that the sign was the image itself. God doesn't repeat himself. He reveals once and expects belief. So tonight, when your mind drifts and a scene of joy or peace appears, don't dismiss it as nothing. That's the whisper of creation, the eternal word speaking in silence. And if you listen closely, you'll realize it's not the world you're trying to change. It's you who's being called to remember who's speaking within. When Neville Goddard said that man's imagination is Christ in action, he wasn't trying to sound mystical. He was revealing the very mechanism of creation. The power you've been taught to worship as external is already alive inside you, shaping every circumstance. You don't use imagination. You are imagination in expression. The divine didn't give you a fragment of itself. It became you. Think of imagination not as a mental movie, but as the living pulse of God within. Every time you imagine something and feel it real, you're letting Christ move through form. That's why creation is finished. It already exists in potential, waiting for you to align with it. You're not creating from nothing. You're awakening to what's already true in divine mind. Most people pray like beggars instead of creators. They plead for change, unaware that the answer is already breathing through them. Neville's law of assumption isn't about forcing outcomes. It's about assuming the divine identity, realizing that God doesn't act for you, but as you. When that truth sinks in, prayer becomes participation, not petition. Imagine someone standing before a mirror, waiting for the reflection to smile first. That's how most of us live, hoping the world will show proof before we believe. But when you grasp that imagination creates reality, you stop waiting for the mirror. You smile first. And soon everything around you begins to reflect the same joy. In the Feeling It Real Neville method, emotion is the movement of Christ through awareness. Every feeling carries creative authority. Doubt delays, faith accelerates. Gratitude seals the work. It's not psychological trickery, it's divine order. When you feel it as real, you've stepped into the state where God has already spoken the word done. To understand this, think of an artist lost in his painting. He doesn't separate himself from the brush or the canvas. He becomes the act of creation itself. That's what it means to be Christ in action. You're not separate from the power that forms galaxies. The same intelligence that painted the stars now paints through your imagination. And this is why Neville insisted that the divine imagination Neville Goddard spoke of is the only reality. You may call it Christ, consciousness, or God within. It doesn't matter. It's the same eternal power wearing different names. The moment you imagine lovingly, you align with its rhythm and allow heaven to take shape through you. There's a quiet dignity that comes with knowing this. You stop fighting circumstances. You stop blaming others. You begin to realize that every person, every event is part of the picture you once painted in your inner world. And the only way to change the scene is to step back into the creative seat, your imagination. Even your so-called mistakes become sacred once you see them through this lens. Every fall teaches faith. Every delay invites deeper embodiment. Christ in action isn't perfection. It's participation. It's awareness, sculpting itself through contrast until the masterpiece is revealed. Nothing is wasted in divine imagination. So when you close your eyes tonight, don't try to imagine as if God is somewhere far above, listening. Realize that the one imagining is the very presence of the Creator. The hands you lift in prayer are the same hands through which creation unfolds, and in that still moment, you'll sense it, the universe breathing through you, quietly waiting for your next vision. It's almost funny how casually people say, "Oh, that's just your imagination," as if imagination were a child's toy instead of the architect of existence. Neville Goddard would smile at that phrase because he knew the secret. Everything you've ever touched, worn, or built once existed only as an invisible image in someone's mind. Reality is imagination, wearing matter as clothing. The biggest mistake is treating imagination like a form of escape instead of the engine of creation. People watch movies, daydream about love, or visualize success, and then quickly dismiss it as fantasy. But the law of assumption manifestation begins right there, in the unseen workshop of the mind. The invisible blueprint always precedes the visible world. Think about your home, your job, even the device you're holding. All of it began as a mental image that someone refused to ignore. They felt it real before it appeared. That's the essence of the Feeling It Real Neville method, to treat imagination not as fiction, but as fact, not yet photographed. Every creation starts with belief that feels natural. When you dismiss imagination, you deny your creative inheritance. You separate yourself from the God within Neville spoke about, the divine power that builds worlds through awareness. It's like owning a seed but refusing to plant it because you can't yet see the tree. The unseen stage of growth is where all miracles begin. So many people pray for change but continue rehearsing the same inner scenes of worry and lack. They don't realize that the mind is a projector, not a camera. It doesn't record life and it plays it. The divine imagination Neville Goddard described is always active, always creating. The question is, are you imagining fear or fulfillment? Here's a simple test. Notice what emotional movie plays when you're not paying attention. If it's filled with doubt, struggle, or frustration, that's the story you're unconsciously broadcasting. But if you begin to imagine lovingly, feeling relief, peace, and joy, the outer world must rearrange itself. That's not philosophy, that's physics of consciousness. It's easy to label imagination as fantasy because the results aren't instant. But just as a seed takes time to break the soil, so do your inner assumptions take time to bloom. Neville called this delay the bridge of incidents, events that unfold naturally to fulfill your inner picture. You won't always see how, but the pattern never fails. You might remember a time when you imagined something vividly and then forgot about it, only to see it appear months later. Maybe it was meeting a person, visiting a place, or receiving unexpected help. That's imagination at work, quietly stitching together circumstances behind the scenes. Creation is finished. Imagination simply selects which scene you enter. When people say, "Be realistic," they often mean, "Stay small." But reality itself is a servant of imagination. The realist calls it delusion. The awakened call it alignment. Once you realize imagination creates reality, logic becomes the follower, not the leader. Faith is simply loyalty to your unseen blueprint. So the next time someone laughs and says, "You're dreaming," smile back, because that's exactly what you're doing, dreaming the next version of your world into being. Fantasy? Hardly. It's the first sketch of divine architecture. And if you hold that feeling long enough, it becomes tomorrow's photograph of faith fulfilled. Most people pray as if they're trying to convince God to move, but the moment you imagine lovingly, you realize the movement is already happening through you. Neville Goddard said it beautifully. Divine will is not a command shouted from above, but a flow felt from within. When your imagination and love merge, you stop asking and start becoming. There's something sacred about imagining for others. When you see someone healed, happy, or prospering in your mind, you are aligning with the highest current of creation. You're not forcing destiny, you're letting God's vision see through your eyes. Every loving image is an act of divine compassion translated into form. This is what Neville meant by creation is finished explained. Not that life is static, but that all outcomes already exist within the infinite imagination of God. When you choose to imagine the best, you simply step into that version of reality. You don't need to push the river. You only need to float in its direction. Imagine a mother picturing her child safe before bedtime. She doesn't analyze probabilities. She feels peace, and that feeling sends ripples into creation. That's divine will in motion. The feeling it real Neville method turns prayer from begging into birthing, a quiet certainty that love, once felt, must find its reflection. Most people resist this simplicity because it removes the drama of waiting for miracles. Yet the miracle is always in motion the moment you assume its reality. When you imagine lovingly, you're not asking the universe to do something for you. You're giving permission for God within to reveal itself through you. Even science reflects this truth in subtle ways. Quantum observers collapse possibilities through attention. But long before physics had equations, mystics like Neville Goddard knew that attention guided by love is the key to manifestation. To feel it real is to observe the divine outcome so completely that nothing else can remain. This is why resentment, fear, or doubt feel so heavy. They disconnect you from the flow of divine imagination. You can't hear God's voice while arguing with its echo. The law of assumption manifestation isn't punishment, it's precision. Whatever you assume with feeling must be mirrored, lovingly or not. The choice is always consciousness. When you start imagining lovingly for others, life softens. You'll notice people treating you differently, doors opening quietly, peace becoming natural. That's the hidden law Neville hinted at. To bless another through imagination is to bless yourself, because in truth, there is no other. There's only God imagining through different forms. So when something feels stuck, don't push harder. Imagine better. Don't wrestle with outcomes, rest in alignment. The divine will is not a commandment, it's a current. It flows where love is felt as real. You are not a puppet asking permission, you are the instrument through which God composes his symphony. And when you finally understand this, prayer becomes joy. You won't wonder if you're worthy of miracles. You'll see they were waiting for you to tune in. Each loving assumption is a key turning in the invisible. And as it unlocks the next scene of your life, you'll feel it, creation smiling through you. There's a sacred window between wakefulness and sleep, a quiet threshold where the mind softens and the divine speaks most clearly. Neville Goddard called it the state akin to sleep. In that drowsy moment, imagination becomes the doorway between worlds. It's here that feeling it real turns into creation itself, whispering reality into being. Before you drift off, don't review what went wrong today. Instead, choose a scene that implies everything went right. If your prayer is for love, imagine being lovingly held. If it's for provision, imagine the relief of abundance already yours. The Feeling It Real Neville method doesn't ask how, it rests in, it is done. You're not trying to force images. You're letting them form naturally, like dreams rising to meet you. Imagine the scene vividly enough to evoke emotion, not detail. You don't need to see the whole movie, just the moment after the miracle. That warm sigh of relief, that gratitude you'd feel, that's the sound of God within Neville speaking. Neville said that this practice is the highest form of prayer because it bypasses the intellect. Logic sleeps while imagination awakens. In that stillness, divine will finds open soil. You're no longer asking the universe to rearrange itself. You're entering the scene where it already has. That's what it means to live in the end. It might feel subtle at first. You'll wonder, am I doing it right? But remember, the divine imagination doesn't measure technique. It responds to sincerity. Feel it once, just for a moment, and something shifts. A quiet peace settles, and you know without proof that creation heard you, because creation wasn't listening out there, it was listening in here. People spend years chasing signs while ignoring the one that appears nightly, the silence before sleep. That's where the real work happens. Every assumption planted there takes root in the subconscious, the soil of manifestation. The law of assumption isn't complex, it's consistent. Whatever you fall asleep feeling as true must appear in form. Think of your imagination as the womb of creation. You conceive ideas through feeling, nourish them in faith, and birth them through persistence. When Neville Goddard said imagination creates reality, this was the process he meant. The scene before sleep isn't fantasy, it's conception. Sleep is simply the gestation of what's already declared. Try this tonight. As you lie in bed, relax every muscle, breathe slowly, and bring to mind one simple image, the result fulfilled. Hear someone congratulate you. Feel the texture of success, love, or healing. Let it be so natural that you forget it's imagined. That's when divine imagination takes over, when it feels like remembering, not creating. And don't worry if the outer world looks the same in the morning. The seed doesn't sprout overnight, yet the soil is already alive. Life begins responding the moment you sleep in the end. You'll start noticing coincidences, subtle shifts, new ease in your emotions. Those are signs that the inner word has been spoken and heard. This nightly ritual is more than a technique. It's communion. The same creative power that formed galaxies listens through your heart and paints through your imagination. Every image you hold in that sacred stillness becomes divine instruction. And when you awaken, life begins to follow the dream you dared to feel real. Neville Goddard often said, feeling is the secret, and he meant it literally. The universe doesn't respond to words or rituals, it responds to frequency. Gratitude, relief, quiet confidence, these aren't emotions, they're divine signatures. When you feel them deeply, it's as if God has stamped your assumption with the seal of, it is done. Think of emotion as the proof of faith. You can affirm all day long, but until your words evoke genuine feeling, they remain surface noise. The Feeling It Real Neville method is not about repetition, it's about embodiment. Once the inner state changes, reality must follow. Feeling is how divine imagination says, I've heard you. You've probably experienced this unknowingly. Remember a time you knew something good was coming, even before seeing any evidence? That calm confidence wasn't optimism, it was communion. The law of assumption manifestation had already activated. Your feeling was the echo of creation fulfilled, the vibration of truth recognizing itself. Gratitude is one of the clearest indicators that divine imagination has taken root. You don't thank the oven before the bread rises, unless you're sure it will. In the same way, true gratitude arises before manifestation. It's the soul's way of saying, I've already eaten. That quiet relief signals that consciousness has shifted from lack to completion. Relief is another sacred sign. Most people confuse relief with giving up, but in truth, it's letting go of resistance. When you finally stop striving, the divine current flows freely. You stop holding your desire hostage with doubt. Neville's Creation is Finished explained exactly this. Nothing new is created. Everything is revealed when you relax into faith. Confidence too has a flavor, not arrogance, but serenity. It's the stillness of someone who no longer checks the soil every hour to see if the seed has sprouted. They know the law works. This quiet trust is magnetic. The moment you assume it, life begins reorganizing itself in silence, preparing to meet your certainty. Feeling is not something you force, it's something you allow. You can't fake gratitude or peace, but you can invite them. One gentle way is to imagine a memory that already carries that vibration. Feel it expand until your new desire merges with it. This is how divine imagination bridges what was and what shall be. Sometimes, the absence of feeling reveals resistance. If you can't yet feel relief or gratitude, it's okay. Start smaller. Imagine how it would feel if you could. Even pretending opens the door a crack. Neville Goddard called this catching the mood. Once you catch it, the feeling grows naturally until it becomes your dwelling place. Every feeling is a prophecy in disguise. Anger predicts more conflict. Peace predicts resolution. You can't escape the harvest of your emotional seeds. That's why awareness is power. Not to control feelings, but to direct them consciously. You are the gardener of states, and feeling is the soil that never refuses to grow. So when you feel that warm wave of certainty wash over you, stay there. Don't chase new techniques, don't seek external signs. The emotion is the sign, it's the pulse of divine imagination confirming it is so. And in that moment, nothing else matters, because you've already touched the unseen truth that soon will be seen. There comes a point on this path when the outer world seems to argue with everything you've imagined. You affirm abundance, yet bills appear. You visualize love, yet silence returns your call. In those moments, Neville Goddard would gently remind, don't be fooled by appearances. They're just delayed echoes of old assumptions still fading out. Reality is like sound in a vast canyon. What you hear now is not what you just spoke, but what you said before. The outer world is always one conversation behind. The real dialogue with the divine happens inside, in the silence of imagination. That's where the law of assumption manifestation plants new words that will echo later as form. When the world seems loud with contradiction, that's the perfect time to grow still. You're not being tested, you're being invited to trust. Neville said, creation is finished explained, meaning the new state already exists. The moment you persist in it inwardly, the outer world has no choice but to eventually catch up. Silence is not delay, it's gestation. It's easy to panic when things look opposite to what you've imagined, but think of it like turning a ship. The rudder moves first, and the vessel follows. Imagination is the rudder, circumstance, the ship. If you react to appearances, you grab the wheel back and spin in circles. Hold steady in silence and the new course is already set. Many mistake this period for failure, yet it's sacred evidence that the old state is dissolving. When chaos arises, it often means the bridge of incidents is unfolding, reorganizing reality to match your new assumption. Don't interpret the noise as disapproval. It's just the previous echo fading into silence. This is why feeling it real Neville method emphasizes inner stability. When you feel the wish fulfilled, you stop begging the world for reassurance. You know the real conversation with God happens in stillness, through feeling, through trust, through quiet certainty. The world is the slowest listener, imagination the fastest speaker. Outer proof is the last to arrive, not the first. Like sunlight reaching Earth 8 minutes late, what you see is already history. So if your outer scene seems stubborn, smile softly. You're simply witnessing the delayed light of an older creation. Keep your faith where the real power resides, in the silence of assumption. Even Jesus demonstrated this principle. Before multiplying the loaves or healing the sick, he thanked God first, before seeing results. Gratitude in advance is the language of divine confidence. It's as if he said, Father, I know you've already done it. That inner certainty precedes every visible miracle, and Neville taught us the same. So when your reality feels out of tune, don't argue with the noise. Close your eyes, breathe, return to the silent image where peace already reigns. That's the frequency of divine imagination Neville Goddard called living in the end. The silence between thoughts is where God speaks loudest, not in thunder, but in assurance. Eventually, the echo fades. What once seemed impossible becomes natural. People call it coincidence. You call it confirmation. That's how you learn to trust the unseen more than the seen. Because once you've heard God in silence, no contradiction can shake you. It's only yesterday's voice fading into tomorrow's truth. You don't need angel numbers or feathers on your path to know when you're aligned with the divine. The real signs are quieter, subtler, yet far more powerful. Neville Goddard said that when imagination and faith move as one, life begins to flow instead of fight. Suddenly things click. You stop chasing and start allowing. One of the first signs is intuition that grows sharper. You begin to sense what's right without reasoning it out. The God within Neville spoke of guides you through feeling, a gentle nudge, a knowing without proof. You find yourself in the right place at the right time, and later you realize, I didn't plan that, but something did. Another sign is peace that doesn't depend on evidence. The outer world can be noisy, uncertain, even chaotic, yet you remain steady. That's feeling it real in motion, the calm confidence that the invisible has already arranged the visible. Peace becomes your baseline, not because life is perfect, but because you trust imagination's timing. You'll also notice an effortless unfolding of events. Opportunities arise naturally, conversations align, delays vanish without struggle. It feels like reality is cooperating instead of resisting. That's what happens when divine imagination has taken root. The bridge of incidents forms under your feet and you simply walk. Neville often said that imagination creates reality, but when you're aligned, you stop forcing creation. It's like catching the right wave. You don't push the ocean, you ride it. Intuition becomes your compass, gratitude your sail, and faith the wind. Everything you need begins arriving in divine sequence, not in stress. You'll also find yourself drawn to simplicity. You no longer crave constant confirmation because the inner voice feels louder than the outer noise. You notice beauty in small things, a song lyric, a stranger's kindness, a quiet morning light. These are all reflections of your own state. God is smiling through details, and when challenges arise, you respond differently. Instead of panic, there's perspective. You think this too serves the plan. That's alignment, not the absence of contrast, but mastery over reaction. You start living as Neville described in Creation is Finished explained, knowing all possibilities already exist, and you're calmly choosing one. Another unmistakable sign is joy without cause. You wake up grateful for no reason. You laugh more, worry less, and things begin to click effortlessly. This isn't luck, it's resonance. When you embody the law of assumption manifestation, life stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like cooperation between you and the divine. Your relationships shift too. People either rise to meet your new energy or gently fade away. The ones who stay reflect your new frequency. They mirror your peace, your kindness, your trust. The outer world becomes a living feedback loop of your inner alignment. That's how divine imagination personalizes guidance. And perhaps the most beautiful sign of all, you feel at home in yourself. You no longer look for God in distant heavens. You feel that sacred presence breathing in your imagination. The line between prayer and life dissolves. Every thought becomes communion, every moment a message. You're no longer listening for the voice, you are it. Logic asks, how will this happen? But imagination already knows. Neville Goddard taught that when you trust the unseen more than appearances, you cross the line from theory into embodiment. Faith isn't belief without reason. It's loyalty to the vision that logic can't yet see. You stop asking how and start living as if. Deep embodiment begins when you no longer treat your imagination as possibility, but as instruction. Each vision, each persistent inner scene is not random. It's divine guidance wearing your language. The God within Neville spoke of doesn't command with words, but with pictures and feelings. You are being told what to become, not what to analyze. The problem is that logic loves control. It demands timelines, methods, guarantees. But imagination moves in symbols, emotions, and whispers. The two speak different languages. When you side with logic, you wait for evidence. When you side with imagination, you become evidence. That's the shift Neville called living in the end. Think of logic as a servant and imagination as the king. When the servant rules, fear governs every choice. But when imagination leads, creation becomes effortless. The law of assumption manifestation only works when the king is on the throne, when imagination gives the order and logic finds the path. There's a quiet freedom that comes when you trust your visions completely. You start walking with invisible confidence, following inner nudges that make no sense, yet always lead somewhere perfect. That's divine imagination in action, guiding you step by step. You're no longer reacting to life, you're orchestrating it from within. Neville's Feeling It Real practice trains you to move beyond logic's grip. When you feel your wish fulfilled, you short-circuit doubt. You're no longer testing the law, you're embodying it. Logic may argue it's impossible, but imagination smiles and says, it's already done. The louder the mind protests, the closer the miracle stands. You can test this easily. Recall a time when you followed an intuitive impulse, maybe to call someone, take a detour, apply for something unexpected, and it turned out perfectly. That wasn't coincidence, it was divine imagination scripting your steps. Once you trust that rhythm, life begins to feel choreographed by something wiser than thought. Deep embodiment doesn't mean you reject logic entirely, it means you assign it the right role. Logic builds the bridge, imagination decides where. The greatest scientists, artists, and leaders all understood this. They followed the image first, and reason caught up later. Every great invention began as unreasonable faith. When you reach this level of trust, even silence becomes guidance. You no longer chase answers, they rise naturally when needed. That's the peace Neville Goddard lived in, a quiet certainty that divine imagination never misleads. It might take you on unexpected paths, but it always takes you home to fulfillment. So when the mind screams, be realistic, smile softly. Realism is just yesterday's imagination pretending to be truth. The next time a vision captures your heart, treat it as divine instruction, because it is. And when you dare to trust that inner voice over the noise, you'll discover God was never testing you. He was training you to listen. If you quiet yourself long enough, you'll hear it, not as sound, but as knowing. The gentle current beneath every thought, every dream, every desire. That's the voice Neville Goddard called divine imagination. It doesn't speak in words, it speaks in images that stir your soul. This is God's language, creation whispering through you. All along you were searching for a sign, a confirmation that the divine hears you. But what if the hearing and the speaking were the same? What if the moment you imagine, you've already been answered? Imagination creates reality, because imagination is the creator. Every vision you honor becomes the word made flesh. This is the secret hidden in plain sight, the sacred dialogue happening inside you every day. You ask through longing, God replies through vision. You speak through desire, God answers through feeling. The two are never separate. The law of assumption is simply learning to listen to that inner conversation with awareness. When you listen deeply, life stops feeling random. Coincidences become confirmations. Dreams start guiding decisions. You realize there's a divine rhythm pulsing beneath every moment, and the more you trust it, the more you see it. The still, small voice of imagination becomes your compass, never shouting, always sure. Feeling is how you translate that voice. Each emotion carries meaning. Peace says yes, tension says not yet. The feeling it real Neville method is nothing more than learning to listen emotionally. When gratitude rises unprovoked, when confidence appears before evidence, that's God within saying, I've already created this. And when you act on that inner knowing, miracles appear ordinary. You'll notice life bending to match your inner images. People showing up, doors opening, timing perfect. Not because you forced it, but because you finally heard and obeyed. You stopped commanding the divine and started collaborating with it. Neville often said, creation is finished explained, meaning every possible outcome already exists in imagination. You're not inventing anything new. You're tuning your awareness to the version already complete. That's how prayer becomes fulfillment. Not asking for something to happen, but realizing it's already happening in consciousness. Listening to the voice of God within you requires gentleness. The world shouts, imagination whispers. You won't hear it through fear or hurry, but through surrender. It's in the pause before reacting, the breath before deciding, the peace after letting go. That silence is sacred. It's where the infinite waits for your attention. As you live this truth, the boundary between you and the divine dissolves. You stop searching for God in temples or stars and begin finding Him in your own awareness. Every image, every feeling becomes a verse in the living scripture of your consciousness. You realize you were never separate, only asleep to the dreamer. So listen deeply, feel fully, speak the language of the unseen until it becomes seen. For imagination is the voice of God within you, and every time you believe it, the word becomes flesh again. And perhaps, in that stillness between thoughts, you'll hear it clearly, creation, breathing your name. So now, take a moment, right now, to pause and listen. What image has been quietly returning to you again and again, no matter how much you've tried to ignore it? That isn't coincidence. That's the divine imagination, the voice of God within, calling you to become the answer to your own prayer. Ask yourself, what if I treated my imagination as sacred? What if every inner vision was instruction, not fantasy? And what if my only job was to feel it real, to rest in the end as if creation were already finished. You don't need to wait for signs. You are the sign. Every heartbeat is proof that God still imagines through you. So tonight, before you sleep, choose one scene that feels like peace and live inside it until it feels true. Then let go and watch the unseen become visible. If this message spoke to your spirit, subscribe now, activate the notifications, and keep walking with me through the teachings of Neville Goddard. Because once you start hearing the voice within, the world around you will never sound the same again.